When editing older instruments, the edit window looks a little bit different. Now I'm going to load in this sound and we'll switch to the edit window. And by this point, you'll recognize most of the controls, but they're laid out a little differently. So I want to go through them quickly. Now there are 3 envelopes and LFOs can modulate pitch, filter, amplitude. Let's start at the top. Now we can choose an element or a zone, just like we've seen before with the Sample Tank 4 instruments. Nothing new there. We have basic level and pan control. This is a 1 oscillator sound. But when we work with the type mode over here, we have some different options. We have resample, which is the same as Sample Tank 4 instruments, and that's the most commonly used. But the legacy instruments use alternate controls for the other modes. Here we have PSTS, which stands for pitch, shift, time, stretch. And we see this also in the loop manager. In one of the earlier videos, it showed these older version of the controls as well, because I was working with an older instrument. But we have the speed and grain. For interesting sound design. And then we have stretch, which is an acronym for Sample Tank Resynthesis Technology, and it recalculates the sample. And here we get the formant control. And there's a phrase button if you're working with looped phrases. Let's go back to resample for the moment. Now, underneath that, we have up to 2 oscillators per sound. As I mentioned, this is a 1 oscillator instrument, so these will affect the whole sound. Nothing unusual here. Level, pan, pitch, bend, range, fine tuning, and we can offset the pitch for it. It's the same note that I'm hitting. Let me command click to reset it. Now we have a velocity strip that determines how much velocity will modulate these parameters. So I can modulate pitch, for example, which is interesting. So the harder I hit, the more it'll change the pitch. Or go down. It's interesting to use this for drum sounds, so when you hit harder, you get a slight increase in pitch. We can modulate filter frequency, we can modulate filter resonance, so kind of interesting. And LFO, depth, and envelope sustain. So modulating filter based on velocity. So the harder I hit, the more the filter opens up. Or the more it'll close down. So, all interesting effects. Now we have play controls where we have poly, where we can set the amount of polyphony, and we have mono mode. And we have legato 1 and legato 2. And legato 1 is the absolute mode that we looked at with the Sample Tank 4 editing. And legato 2 is the relative mode. So for example, let's say I want to set up a nice steep glide effect. Here it is in legato 1 mode, which is absolute, meaning we'll get a long transition, whether it's a wide interval or a close interval. For example, let's get the filter back. Okay, here we go. And here's a closer interval. So it takes just as long regardless of how close they are versus this one where we'll get the longer interval. And at a shorter interval, it'll be quicker. So 2 modes to choose from. Now LFOs, we have 2 of them. And they're slightly different. The first one works on a per voice basis, meaning it's generated with every note played, and it can reset with every new note, depending whether we have it in free run mode or not. When free is on, it'll run freely, and when it's off, it'll be retriggered with every new note. And then we have 2, and we can use this to modulate pitch, filter. So for example, let's say I wanted to go random and assign that to pitch, and we can sync to BPM or not. But again, holding 1 note. Or we can have it modulate filter. And pan at the same time. Even pitch at the same time. Even level at the same time. So a lot of interesting effects available. Let me just reset these all to their default values. So we have rate, depth, and then the phase. And in LFO1, we also have the fade in value that we can use. Now we have 2 envelopes. The first one is dedicated to amp, and we have attack, hold, decay, sustain, and then the amount there. Now envelope 2 can be used to modulate filter or pitch. There's a really slow attack. Let's go to quicker attack and have it decay down to a lower level with a quicker decay. And we can have it modulate pitch. And the filter section has the familiar types to choose from and then the familiar modes to choose from. So this is what you'll see editing older instruments in Sample Tank 4. We'll continue with more in the next video.